At my son's wedding, everyone laughed when I walked out. They thought I was just some bitter old mom causing drama. What they didn't know was that while he was cracking jokes into the mic, I'd already taken the house, the land, and every dollar he was bragging about. And I didn't scream, didn't cry. I just cut the power to his whole fantasy in front of 100 people who had no idea what they were watching. Stay with me, and I'll show you exactly how I turned their betrayal into quiet, legal revenge. My name is Evelyn. I'm 61 years old, and before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. I want you to remember this story the next time someone underestimates you or turns you into the punchline in a room you helped pay for. It started at the reception for my son's second wedding. I say second because he barely acknowledged the first. A courthouse, a rushed signature, a wife he never introduced to family properly. That one ended quietly. No vows for anyone to cry over, no first dance. Just a blurry photo he texted me hours later like it was an afterthought. This one? This one had flower walls, champagne towers, custom cocktail napkins with their initials printed in gold foil. He was making a show this time. He was also making a statement. And not just about love. It was about image, about proof, about telling everyone. See? I made it. The venue was in northern Georgia, just outside of Savannah. They'd rented a hall with chandeliers the size of small cars. Light poured off them in soft pools, turning the polished floor into a mirror that caught glimpses of heels, dress hems, and nervous hands. Everything smelled faintly of roses and new money. That sharp sweetness of overworked floral arrangements, layered with perfume and spilled champagne. I wore navy, simple satin, long sleeves, nothing flashy, nothing that would invite attention. I'd learned a long time ago that the most dangerous person in the room is rarely the loudest. But still, I knew what was coming. There is a tension you feel in your bones when you've known someone their whole life. A little tightening in your chest, a prickle at the back of your neck. Like the air itself is warning you that the person holding the microphone is about to use it as a weapon. I was seated at the table closest to the stage, right between the groom's table and the band. That wasn't generosity. That was strategy. My son wanted me close enough to see everything, but far enough from the bride's family that I wouldn't embarrass him. Close enough for the photographs, but not close enough for conversation. He always did this. Used distance as a weapon, smiles as camouflage. He'd inherited his father's talent for keeping his hands clean while someone else did the cutting. They handed him the mic after dessert. You could still smell vanilla and sugar from the cake, and the plates clinked softly as the servers cleared them. He tapped it twice, grinning like a man who thought he was clever. Like the whole world had been leading up to this moment. His second wedding, his second reinvention. He tilted his chin toward the crowd like an actor waiting for his cue. My son, all right, don't worry, I won't keep you long. Laughter, clinking glasses. The band shifted to a low murmur behind him, instruments resting at their sides. He pointed toward a man standing at the edge of the room. My son. But come on, this man is a joke. There it was. That familiar, icy tone he slipped into whenever he wanted someone small. Mocking, playful enough to pass as humor, but sharp underneath, like a cracked blade hidden in a bouquet. I'd heard that tone when he was 12 and making fun of a boy who stuttered. I'd heard it when he was 21, talking about a girlfriend who cried too easily. A ripple of laughter moved through the room. Some people clapped. A few looked away. Their eyes slid to the floor, to their drinks, to anything that wasn't the target. People always tell on themselves in those moments, who they are willing to laugh at, and who they're afraid to stand up to. The man he pointed to didn't flinch, didn't lower his gaze, didn't offer a fake laugh or retreat into the crowd. He stood tall, hands behind his back, suit clean, composed like marble. He looked like he could stand there for hours, untouched by the noise around him. I folded my napkin slowly, carefully. I needed my hands to be doing something other than shaking. The silverware reflected light from the chandelier overhead. The distorted glint of metal flashed against white porcelain each time my fingers brushed it. My fingers trembled just enough to make the knife clink against the plate, because I knew exactly what this was. It wasn't just a joke at someone's expense, it was a warning shot. A message to the room about who he believed was beneath him. That man, the one my son called a joke, was the man who helped me build everything my son now pretended was his. The businesses, the deeds, the accounts my son liked to brag about in front of his friends. He wasn't security. He wasn't a waiter. He was the one who pulled me out of financial ruin 5 years ago, when my husband died and the bank almost took our home. He sat at my kitchen table with the foreclosure notice between us, and instead of pity, he brought a pen, a folder, and a plan. He was the silent partner behind the land deal that tripled in value, the quiet witness in the notarized agreements, the man who advised me when my son tried to claim power of attorney, without my consent. He was the one who slid the papers back across the desk and said calmly, "She understands her rights," while my son tried not to look offended. I looked toward him. The room blurred a little at the edges. He nodded once. No words exchanged, no theatrics, just a small acknowledgement, like the closing of a circuit we'd wired together months ago. I turned my head slowly toward the main doors. The white doors were tall, framed with gold trim, opened and closed all night by staff carrying trays and equipment. 2 men in black suits stepped in. Their movements were efficient, unhurried, eyes scanning the room in quiet arcs. Not the same as the venue staff. These were private security. Mine. Not my son's, not the venue's. Not a favor from some uncle on the bride's side. Mine. Paid for by signatures my son didn't witness and meetings he wasn't invited to. The music dipped, not abruptly, but like a wave pulling back before a storm. Conversation dimmed with it. The rise and fall of voices softened as if someone had placed a hand gently over the whole room. The clink of champagne glasses faded. One of the guards walked toward my son. The other stayed by the doors, a quiet shadow. Security. "Sir, we need to speak with you outside." My son blinked. Smile faltered just slightly. A tiny crack in the mask that people in the front rows could finally see. My son. "I'm sorry." "What?" He laughed nervously, looked toward the groom's table, waited for someone to laugh with him. They didn't. They shifted in their chairs, cleared their throats, adjusted their napkins. I stood up. I felt the weight of 61 years in my knees and the steadiness of 61 years in my spine. Not fast, not dramatic, just enough to command attention. People don't expect older women in simple dresses to be the ones who change the temperature of a room, but we do. Quietly. Completely. Me. This event has standards. My voice was calm, almost too calm, the kind of calm that makes people listen harder. I wanted them to lean in, to hear every word. Me. Anyone who disrespects the host, or the people under his protection, doesn't stay. I let the words settle. No rush, no apology tucked into the end of the sentence. I wasn't asking for agreement. I was stating policy. Silence. You could hear the air shift. Glasses paused halfway to lips. Forks hovered over plates, like a vacuum had pulled the oxygen out of the room. The chandeliers hummed faintly, a soft electric buzz over 100 held breaths. The guards didn't touch him. Didn't have to. He walked out on his own. Red spots bloomed high on his cheeks as he moved past the tables. Red-faced, mumbling something about a misunderstanding. Little phrases spilled out of him. It was a joke. Come on. You're being sensitive. The same phrases I'd heard in different forms my whole life, glancing back like he was waiting for someone to defend him. No one did. Not even his new bride. She sat there frozen, mouth parted slightly, eyes flicking between me and the man he called a joke. Her perfectly lined lips stayed parted like she'd forgotten what she was about to say. Because now, she wasn't so sure who held the power in that room. Her hand tightened around her bouquet until the stems bowed. I walked back to my chair. The floor under my heels felt more solid than it had when I'd arrived. Smoothed the front of my dress. Sat. My pulse slowed with every breath, like my body was finally catching up to a decision my mind had made months ago. No one laughed after that. Not because they were scared, but because the illusion had cracked. The room had seen the strings, the scaffolding behind my son's performance. They'd mistaken volume for strength, mockery for wit, position for power. They'd believed the man with the microphone was the one in charge. But real power doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need a microphone. It doesn't ask permission. It sits quietly in signed documents, in ownership records, in the choices you make when everyone thinks you're too old, too soft, or too dependent to make them. It waits, quietly, until the joke tells itself. The silence after they took him out was heavier than any applause I had ever heard. It pressed against my chest and pulled me backward through time. I watched guests shift in their seats, hands tightening around glasses, eyes suddenly unsure where to land. Someone coughed. A chair scraped softly against the floor. The band stood frozen, instruments hanging uselessly at their sides. I stayed seated, calm, still, because I had learned a long time ago that stillness unsettles people more than anger ever could. The smell of champagne and roasted chicken turned faintly sour, and for a moment it carried me back to a different room, a different silence. The day my husband's lawyer slid a thin folder across a metal desk in a small county office in Michigan. The air there was cold and dry, smelling of toner and old carpet instead of flowers and money. My husband had been gone 6 weeks. 6 quiet weeks of casseroles and sympathy cards and people saying, "Let me know if you need anything," then disappearing when I actually did. That folder held everything I thought we owned, and everything we were about to lose. My son sat beside me that day, checking his phone, tapping his foot like he was late for something more important than my life collapsing. When the lawyer explained the debt, the missed filings, the property taxes stacking like bricks around our necks, my son leaned back and crossed his arms. The lawyer's voice stayed soft and practiced, but the words were not soft at all. "Son, you should just sign things over to me. I can handle it." He said it casually, like he was offering to carry groceries. My stomach dropped. "Me. Sign what over?" My voice sounded small, even to me. Thin, almost polite. "Son. Power of attorney. The house. Accounts. It's easier that way." He smiled when he said easier. It was a practiced smile, the one he used with cashiers and clients and anyone he wanted something from. The lawyer glanced between us, lips pressed together, choosing not to interfere. That smile told me everything. The calculation behind his eyes, the tiny flare of satisfaction when he thought I might say yes. Some betrayals don't leave bruises, just silence. I didn't sign that day. My fingers rested on the pen, feeling the cool plastic against my skin, but I kept my hand still. I told him I needed time. He sighed like I was being difficult, his chair creaking as he stood. "Son. Mom. You're making this harder than it has to be. Harder than it has to be." As if the easy thing was to hand him the keys and let myself become a guest in my own life. That night, alone in my bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed holding my Medicare card in one hand and an overdue notice in the other, thinking about how 35 years of marriage could end in a stack of papers that didn't even smell like him anymore. His closet still held his shirts, but the bed felt larger and colder without his weight on his side. I listened to the house breathe, the refrigerator humming in the kitchen, a pipe knocking in the wall, cars passing far off on the highway. I tried to imagine what starting over at my age would even look like. That was when the man he called a joke entered my life. Not dramatically, not heroically. Through a referral scribbled on the back of a Walmart receipt by a woman at church who whispered, "He helped my sister." I called him 2 days later from my kitchen table. The laminate was peeling at the corners, and I traced the lifted edge with my thumb while the phone rang. He answered on the second ring. His voice was steady, unhurried. He listened. He didn't rush me. Every time I paused to swallow tears or apologize for rambling, he said, "It's all right. Go on." He didn't speak down to me. He didn't make me feel stupid for not knowing the right terms. He laid out options slowly, carefully. Trust filings, county records, quiet moves that didn't alert anyone watching too closely, including my son. We met at that same county office, but this time I walked in with a folder of my own. He sat beside me and slid documents across for me to read, not just to sign. He circled dates and initial lines, explaining every mark. I watched my name appear on new papers that meant something different now. Ownership, protection, choice. I rebuilt piece by piece, internally first, then legally. I learned to read the language of deeds and titles the way I had once learned recipe cards and school permission slips. Some days it felt like trying to lift a house by myself with bare hands, but every signature was a brick taken off my chest and set back into my foundation where it belonged. I kept my mouth shut. I let my son believe his version of the story, that I was confused, that I needed guidance, that he would inherit control eventually. At holidays, he would lean back in his chair, talking loudly about his plans for the property, for the accounts, as if they were already his. I nodded, stirring gravy, folding napkins, playing the part of the grateful, aging mother. They called me selfish right before they stole everything I earned. That was the line that stuck with me. Selfish. As if protecting the roof over my head was greed. Back at the reception, I felt a hand brush my shoulder. The room snapped back into focus. The flowers, the low light. The murmur of shaken conversations trying to rearrange themselves into something normal. It was the man himself. The one my son had pointed at. The one he tried to turn into a joke. He didn't look triumphant. There was no smirk, no satisfaction in his eyes. He looked concerned. "Allie, are you all right?" The question was simple, but it landed heavy. No one had asked me that when the bills came, or when my son suggested handing him my life like a signed-over title. I nodded. I felt the answer settle deep in my bones before it reached my lips. Me. I am. Finally. Across the room, my son's new bride avoided my eyes. Her mother leaned in close, whispering something sharp into her ear. The truth was spreading without a single word spoken. She smiled like I was the joke. Earlier, during photos, she had tilted her head and asked in a syrupy voice if I was comfortable, if I needed to sit down. Now that smile slipped for just a second, then snapped back into place, strained at the edges. I made sure I was the punchline instead. If they wanted a story to tell about this night, I would decide what shape it took. Not as the confused old woman, not as the burden, as the person who drew a line and meant it. The music started again, softly, awkwardly. The band looked at each other before easing back into a slow, safe song, the kind nobody could object to. People pretended to relax, shoulders dropped, conversations restarted in hesitant fragments. But nothing went back to the way it was. It never does, once the mask slips. Once you've seen where the cracks are, you can't unsee them. You start noticing every flinch, every forced laugh, every quick glance toward the door. I lifted my glass, not to celebrate, but to mark the moment. The champagne bubbled softly, catching the light. The moment I stopped protecting him from consequences. For years, I had stepped between him and the fallout of his choices, excused his absences, smoothed over his sharp words, called it stress, exhaustion, a phase. I had told myself that was what mothers did, that love meant cushioning the impact. But love without boundaries is not love, it is surrender. So I sat there, 61 years old, in a navy dress that no one had really noticed when I walked in, holding a glass in a room that no longer belonged entirely to my son's version of the story. I let the awareness settle over me slowly. I was not walking away empty-handed. I had my name, my documents, my decisions. And now, finally, I had my silence back. I took a small sip. The champagne was a little too sweet, but I let it sit on my tongue anyway. This was not a toast. It was a record. This is where it changed. They didn't speak of him again. Not at the reception. Not in the whispers near the bar. Not over the last slices of cake passed around on small white plates. Not the morning after. They talked about the weather, about the dress, about how beautiful the flowers were, and how generous the bar tab seemed, but not about the moment the music dipped and my son was let out of his own performance. Not even when they posted the official wedding photos on Facebook. He was cropped out of everyone, as if the pixels themselves had agreed to forget. I watched them try to edit the story in real time. Captions about love and new beginnings, about soulmates and answered prayers. Like nothing happened, like power hadn't shifted silently while the chandeliers still sparkled overhead. But I remembered every detail. The way my son's voice cracked just a little when security approached. The flicker in his eyes when he realized no one was laughing with him anymore. The way no one followed him out. No chair legs scraping after his. No hurried footsteps. Just the quiet closing of the door behind him. The way his bride didn't rise from her seat. Her hand stayed wrapped around her bouquet, knuckles white. Her eyes on me, then on the man he'd tried to humiliate. Then back down at the tablecloth like she was reading a future she hadn't prepared for. That silence wasn't absence. It was clarity. The sound of something snapping that would never mend. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a small, final break somewhere deep in the structure that held us together. I stayed one more day in Savannah. I slept lightly in the hotel room, the hum of the air conditioner filling the spaces where worry used to live. In the morning, the city was soft and washed out. I walked slowly through the lobby, feeling eyes flick toward me and then away. Everyone knew and no one said anything, just long enough to be seen at brunch, long enough to sit at the end of a table covered in white linen and coffee cups and half-eaten fruit bowls. Long enough for her father to approach me, his tone cautious, his napkin still folded in his hand like a shield. Father-in-law. I didn't realize. He'd done all that. His gaze held mine for a second before it slid away. Me. Most people didn't. My voice was steady. Father-in-law. You handled it with grace. The pause before grace was heavy. I smiled, not because I forgave anything, but because there's nothing more unnerving to some men than a woman who wins quietly. Just a decision made and carried out while they were busy raising their glasses. The clink of cutlery and the forced brightness in the small talk around us went on. People asking about travel plans, about flights, about how lovely the ceremony had been. No one named the fracture sitting right in the middle of the table. I took the long road back through Georgia that evening. I could have gone straight to the highway. I didn't. I wanted time with my thoughts, not just miles. The sun was low. It sank behind the trees, turning them into dark cutouts against a bruised sky. The fields passed in soft gold blurs. I played old jazz on the radio, trumpets and pianos from another era, steady and familiar. At a rest stop, I sat in my car, fingers on the wheel, watching the neon light from the vending machines stain the windshield blue, thinking about the house I almost lost, the one I still lived in, the one with the creaky stair on the third step and the kitchen window that stuck in the summer, the one my son thought would be his someday. He'd pointed to rooms once, talked about renovations, about turning my bedroom into an office when I was ready to move in with him. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd placed it in trust. Irrevocable. A word that felt strange and heavy in my mouth at first, like a stone, until I tasted the safety in it. Filed in Wayne County. I remembered the clerk's neutral face, the quiet stamp of approval, the soft clack of the file drawer closing. Sealed. Untouchable. Not even my name on the deed anymore. Just a number. Just a code. Just protection. Some people think safety looks like alarms and cameras. Mine looked like signatures and file numbers that my son would never see. Because when someone tries to take everything from you, you learn how to build walls no one sees. Not out of bitterness, out of experience. You learn that love can coexist with boundaries, that you can care about someone and still not hand them the matches to your house. It wasn't revenge. It was math. It was logic. It was survival. I added up the years I had worked, the hours saved, the small sacrifices. Then I subtracted the lies, the entitlement, the way he had looked at me across that lawyer's desk in Michigan like I was a problem to be solved instead of a person to be protected. And now, he couldn't touch it. Not legally, not emotionally, not ever. He could stand on the sidewalk and look at it. He could imagine himself inside. But that was all it would ever be for him now. Imagination. He'd mocked the man who helped me build the escape hatch, mocked him in front of 100 witnesses, called him a joke in a room paid for with the wealth that man helped secure. But all that did was expose his own helplessness. The flailing of someone who assumes the door is unlocked, only to find out it's been bolted from the inside for years. There was no confrontation after, no dramatic phone call, no long tearful message, no apology, just distance, unanswered texts, his name showing up less and less on my caller ID until it stopped appearing at all. His wife sent a Christmas card that year. The envelope was neat, her handwriting looping and careful. No note inside, just a printed message and their names. He hadn't signed it. The photo showed them on a dock somewhere, water stretching out behind them in gray sheets, smiling like they'd rewritten the ending, like the story was theirs alone to tell now. But I knew better, because I rewrote the ending. In county offices and quiet meetings, in signatures and sealed envelopes. He just doesn't know it yet. I still hear from the man my son called a joke. Not constantly, just enough to remind me that I am not alone in the choices I made. He sends postcards from places I've never been, cities and shorelines and deserts printed in glossy color. Always the same handwriting. Block letters, steady and sure. Always the same phrase at the bottom. They laugh now, they won't later. The first time I read it, I smiled. Not because I wanted anyone to suffer, but because I understood. He wasn't talking about revenge. He was talking about perspective, about how time has a way of showing who really understood the value of what was at stake. Sometimes I wonder if my son even remembers what he said that night. If he recalls the exact words, the tilt of his chin, the way his voice rose when he thought he had the room with him, or if he's convinced himself it didn't matter, that it was just a joke, just his mother overreacting. But I remember the heat in my cheeks when he pointed, I remember the steady nod from the man at the edge of the room. I remember how power shifted. Not with yelling, not with threats, but with one nod, and the sound of chairs moving aside for justice. That sound stays with me. Wood on polished floor. So when people ask me what happened, why we don't talk, why my holidays are quieter, why I seem lighter these days, I just say, he chose the microphone. He chose the spotlight, the applause, the easy laughs at someone else's expense. I chose the silence, the documents, the distance. And the silence spoke louder. It spoke in the things I did not sign, in the doors I did not open, in the boundaries I did not cross just to keep the peace. If you were in my shoes, what would you have done? If this story struck a chord, hit like, subscribe, and tell me what you think in the comments.